Welcome to part one of effective coaching. As you've realized by now, coaches coach people and then we teach our sport. So, as sports performance specialists or strength and conditioning coaches, it's important to come up with great programs that are going to ensure that our athletes get stronger, faster, and perform better on the fields. But the only way we can do that is to make sure that they are learning or want to learn all the things that we're teaching, right? To come up with a program and have an athlete come into the weight room and not give it their all, they're not going to get anything out of the program, right? So really, it's the buy-in from the athletes that make the strength program successful. And so this part of the Soldiers to Sidelines Sports Performance Seminar, we're going to focus on effective coaching. How do we get our players to do what we want them to do, but because they want to do it at the best of their ability? So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to talk about the 6 components of effective coaching. Okay. Every time we step into the gym or out on the field, we got to make sure that we're earning our whistle today, right? And that goes for every single day in everything that we do. Earn your whistle. So, what are the 6 components of effective coaching? First, we have knowledge, communication, care, and that's an acronym that we're going to go into and describe, candor, preparation, and environment. And for this first section of the homework, we're going to focus on 5 of these 6 components, and we're going to leave one for its own special section. I bet you can guess what section that's going to be. Which of these 6 components do you think requires the most work or is the most difficult? Hopefully you're thinking communication, because usually the majority of the problems that arise in this world is because there was poor communication at some level. So for today, we're going to focus on knowledge, care, candor, preparation, and environment. Knowledge. What do we mean by that? Well, Vince Lombardi said mastery begins with self-knowledge. And at Soldiers to Sidelines, we break down knowledge into 3 different types. There's self-knowledge, knowledge of ourselves, knowledge of our craft, right, which is all the sciences that underpin sports performance, and then knowledge of our personnel, like the other strength coaches that we're going to be working with, any of the other position coaches, the players, the administration, the athletic directors. We also want to have an idea of what's going on with the parents of our athletes, especially if we're coaching younger athletes. That's really going to be important when we're trying to motivate someone, right? So let's say we're in a high school and we're a strength and conditioning coach, and player comes to you, they just finished up school, they got their head down, and they're kind of like sandbagging it in the beginning of the workout. And this is bothering you, right? Like you're just like, wow, why doesn't this person try harder? So it starts eating at you. And then all of a sudden you want to address this athlete like with a stern tone of voice. So you go over to him and you start riding him, yelling him, try harder. Why aren't you working harder? And you're really giving him grief. And then all of a sudden you realize that this athlete's parents are going through a divorce. They might have had a blowout fight in the morning. The kid didn't even want to come to school that day in the first place. And they're just down in the dumps. And now this athlete has to hear it from you too, right? That's not going to be very motivational whatsoever. So having a good idea of what's going on with the parents, what they do for a living, maybe what's going on in their household is going to give a lot of information. It's going to provide a lot of knowledge to guide you on how best to motivate and inspire your athletes when they get on into the weight room. So craft, understanding our craft. That's why you're all here in the seminar this week, right? We want to be curious. We want to be a student and really study everything that we're talking about. Thermogenics, nutrition, sleep, neuroscience, biomechanics, kinesiology, physiology, anatomy. These are all the things that we got to know deeply for us to become the best sports performance coach possible. And you can do that by attending advancement clinics like this one. But we encourage you to go to as many as you can, right? It doesn't even matter if it's like a bad clinic. There's always something you can learn and pick up. And lastly, you want to immerse yourself in this training environment, in your craft. So go start training athletes. see if you can volunteer at a university or at the high school, or just try to get any kind of gig you can possibly get, because you learn so much by doing. Uh, and read. I know not everybody is a big reader, but if you can find the right books, and we'll help you with that, you can really attain a ton of information to be the best coach you can possibly be. But of these three, the most important is knowledge of ourselves. How can we possibly coach anyone else if we don't understand ourselves first, right? So one of the things that is important is, what are our triggers? Think about that. Like, a trigger is something that is not an annoyance, like being stuck in traffic. That's annoying. That is not a trigger, right? Maybe when someone screams and yells and then flips you the bird because they're just overtly disrespectful, that might be a trigger and hopefully doesn't incite road rage, right? So we have to know what these are, because if we can identify what our triggers are, now we can get out in front of it, because we want to use our brain as a tool. We don't want our brains to be reflexive organs where, something happens, like an event happens, and then we just flip out and start screaming and yelling, or whatever the case. If we're behaving the way we don't want to behave in that moment, now we're not being effective as a coach, and we're not using our brain as a tool. So if we can understand what are those triggers that do that to us, we can come up with a strategy and practice this strategy so we can become more effective. And like, one of those strategies might be just pausing and reflecting, right? Take a second, recognize a trigger and stop. Don't let yourself flip out. Maybe put yourself in that person's shoes for just 10 seconds. Think about what the outcome you want from this situation is, right? And this way we can regulate our emotions, either downregulate or upregulate in certain situations to achieve the desired outcome. We want to know how we accept criticism before we can even give it, right? As coaches, that's like the number one thing that we do, is fix flaws, right? So how do we like to receive criticism? And is there a strategy that is probably most useful to the person you're talking to give it? What is my conversational style? Think about that. What is your conversational style? And what the heck does that even mean? And we'll get into that. Listening style. When we start talking about communication, everybody listens a little bit differently. And ultimately, we want to be the coach that we hope to become. And we want to do this day in and day out. And the thing is, if you're like me, you already think you're a great coach, right? You think you're doing all these right things, but are you being perceived that way? You're going to want to ask your athletes. So give it a coaching survey, make it blind. See if you can get candid feedback as to how you're being received by your players. Next is CARE. And CARE is an acronym that we've come up with, and it just happens to work out so beautifully, where we feel like if you care, you're connecting, you're being authentic, you're able to establish rapport, and you can be extremely empathetic. Because, you hear the old Teddy Roosevelt line that I always butcher every single time, but it's something like, no one cares what you know until they know how much you care. I think I just mastered it, by the way. Nobody cares what you know until they know how much you care. Then you start to think about it, it makes sense. But then you ask yourself, well, what the heck is care? And if you look up the definition, it's kind of weak. So we believe that care is, you can show that you care if you can successfully connect, be authentic, establish rapport, and have great empathy. So how do you connect? Well, always ask the individuals about interests and find ways to identify with them. So talk to the individuals, not always the group. A lot of times you'll have teams come into your weight room and you're very quick to, get everybody set up into their groups, go over to the different weight racks and start the workout. Well, find out what interests each of these people. If it's a collegiate weight room, what are their majors? Why'd they choose that major? What are they interested in? What are they going to do when they leave the weight room? Right? What sports do they play and why? Touch. Touch is like a taboo thing to talk about right now, right? It's like athletes don't want to be touched. But the reality is, we know from neuroscience that touch is the ultimate form of connection, and you can do it appropriately. A hand on the shoulder, a pat on the back, it can be appropriate. And a lot of times, even hugging is totally cool. It just happens to be in the right way, in the right context, and boundaries have to be uh, outlined. Another thing, especially in the weight room, a lot of times as strength coaches and sports performance coaches, we have to touch our athletes to get them into correct positions. So we might be grabbing a knee, the small of the back. Anytime you're going to do that, let the athlete know and ask permission. Hey, is it okay if I put my hand on the small of your back to get your hips in the right position? I'm about to touch your shoulder. Would you mind if I pull your shoulder back? Right, the worst thing you can do is try to get somebody into a position and just start moving their bodies without their permission. That is one way to disconnect and show that you don't care because you're not respecting their boundaries. And then small talk, engage. There's value in it. I know time is limited and, not everybody has something, profound to say, but the act of sharing conversation in itself is how we connect. Be authentic. Find your style. My style is going to be very different than your style. And the more unique it is to you, the better. And I'm sure everyone has a mentor in strength and conditioning, sports performance that you've always looked up to. I mean, like, I adore my strength coach. Like, he's the reason that I even got into it in the first place. His name is Bill Starr. In no way am I anything like that guy. And if you ever happen to speak to him, he's one of the most esoteric people you'll ever meet in your life. And he had such a unique style. I mean, this guy had gray hair pulled back long into a ponytail with an American flag bandana wrapped around his head. He was German, but also Native American. And he was jacked. So like when he was coaching me, he was like in his early 60s and he was squatting 405 for reps. And he was so big and he kind of like had a waddle and he had a pinky nail that he shaved to a point and he would poke us with it. And he was a man of few words, but the guy was brilliant. And because he was so unique in his style, I hung on every single word he said. So let those idiosyncrasies and interests show. Like, if that's who you are, be proud of it. Rapport. Be a coach, not a friend. That's how you establish rapport. It's essentially, rapport is how we interact with each other, right? So it's not just about connecting. Part of it goes into conversational style, right? That's a big part of rapport, but it's the tacit agreement of how we treat each other. And you can establish rapport also by just paying attention, right? That's probably the greatest gift you can ever give somebody, is your time and your attention. And lastly, empathy. I think everybody watching this right now would agree that empathy is a really important skill to master. And if you have a bunch of athletes and they're all, they're out of a specific age, why don't you recall moments when you were in their shoes at their age, like when you were 14 and you're a guy and you're just starting to bench press, or you're a teenage girl and you're just going into the gym for the first time and it's so socially awkward. Remember what that felt like and put yourself in their shoes, and how would you like to have been treated then? And also, what was the most important thing to you at that age? Sometimes as coaches, we forget that, like, sports performance is all we think about. This is what we do. This is our vocation, and everybody else should feel like that. Well, I got news for you. That 18-year-old kid on the football team, he's probably not feeling that. Make one-on-one time to get to know your players. It's a great way to establish empathy. Next is candor. The whole reason we have to employ candor is because it allows us to earn respect. Who here has ever been told it is better to be respected than liked, right? I've heard that. And I think you can be both. But to achieve respect, we have to be able to be compassionately honest. So many times you'll hear people say, "Can I be brutally honest with you?" And that leads us to believe, like, why does it have to be brutal? Like, why do you have to bash me over the head with the truth? Can we exhibit some empathy, put ourselves in their shoes and say, okay, I'm just going to call it like it is, and then speak the kind truth. And the best part about sports performance is so much of what we do is quantifiable. Like you get to write down the actual weight that's being lifted, the time that's being run, right? So much of what we do is measurable, right? So measure it and write it down. And this way we can speak to the athlete's behavior based on the metrics that we've been following, right? So what is good, what is bad? We've set the scale already because it's quantifiable and measurable, and then we can be completely objective. You might hate a certain athlete. I'm not saying you have to like everybody. So if you don't like a certain athlete, but then you go look at their numbers and you're like, geez, this person I thought was lazy, but they're getting stronger and stronger week over week. And come to think of it, they're in the top 20% of the class in strength. And it's great to get into the numbers and look at that because that makes yourself candid as a coach back to yourself. And now you can be candid with that athlete and how to get the most out of them. And set prior expectations. Like this is what success looks like in the weight room. This is what success looks like out on the field when we're doing our times, right? These are the goals, the times that you have to run for your body weight and your body composition. That's the best part about sports performance. It's so empirical that we can be objective, set prior expectations, and then it makes it even easier for us to be compassionately honest. And if we can do all these things, we're going to earn people's respects, whether or not they like lifting and running or working out in general. Preparation. Always have a plan. It's been my experience with most strength and conditioning coaches that like this is an easy thing to do. Most strength coaches are super organized. They have plans, right? But what are the plans most folks have? It's the strength program. It's the conditioning program. It's the macro cycles that we're building out. And if you're not doing this right now, don't worry, because we're going to do this in detail on the last day of this seminar. But like other like plans you should have are plans for parental challenges. Right? What if a parent doesn't like what you're doing? How are you going to handle it? What if the organization changes, like the athletic department starts slashing budgets and has to get rid of some of your assistants? What if they just want you to focus on certain sports and not others? Installation schedules. When are you going to introduce certain exercises and why? The issues with the different sport coaches. Right? If you're a sports performance coach, you might be doing programs and managing athletes for 4 different sports, and they could be totally different. You could have track and field, you could have field hockey, you could have men's and women's lacrosse. All of those sports are going to be completely different. What's your plan for injuries? What's your plan for injuries that happen in your weight room or on your watch? What do you do? What is your plan for injuries that happen under the sport coach's watch and then they come into your weight room and they can't do the program you have set out for them because they just hurt their wrist? So is there a modified strength program where we don't have to load the wrist, but they can still get an upper body workout? Have that plan premeditated ahead of time. And lastly, clear, consistent calendars always. Make sure everybody knows where to be when. The sport coaches, the athletes, your assistants, etc. And lastly, environment. Environment is so important in the world of sports performance because we have direct control over that, right? We can frame the walls of our weight room. We decide what slogans we want to have up there, what phrases, we can adjust the lighting, we can adjust the smell, all of this stuff. And think about the space, the actual context, how we can create bonds between our players themselves. How about the bonds between you as the coach and all of the players? So the strength of those bonds, in addition to the space and what the space looks like and feels like, creates great energy. And you know that when you go into a great sports performance room, right? Or a weight room and you're like, man, I could just feel the intensity in here. That's what we're trying to create. And you can use that to your advantage to be an effective coach. So how? When we're manipulating the space, We want to appeal to all five senses, right? Sight, right? We want to think about the cleanliness. Keep your weight room clean. There's nothing worse than walking into a weight room and there's plates all over the place. And the 5 pound plates are where the 45-pound plates are to be. And then like you have like the real small plates behind the big plates. So you got to take off 100-pound plate, 45-pound plates just to get to the only 25-pound plate you have in the room. That's so annoying. Keep it organized. Do you want an organized team? Keep the space organized and clean. What's the color, right? What are the school's colors? The lighting. Do you want it to be bright or do you want it to be dark? It's up to you. Sound. This is a big one. I think I might be permanently deaf from all of the loud music that has been played in every single weight room I've ever been in. And it's been hysterical. So it's hysterical because I know what's popular because every single team that used to come into the weight room, I'd hear the same thing over and over and over again. And I'm deaf because I let them pick it, right? It's about the player's experience, not my experience. But you have some control over it, right? Because there's certain songs that like you might not want those messages being played. And you can then also select certain kinds of music to make sure it appeals to everyone's taste. Because if it's like hip hop every single day, there's going to be some country music fans that aren't going to be so excited about that, and vice versa. So make sure that you're controlling the sound to fit the mood, the tempo, and the tastes of all of the athletes, right? And then decibel level. I know they're going to want to crank things up, but sometimes the music has to come down so you can give proper instruction, right? And beware of the content. You don't want certain music being played, for a 15-year-old weight room. Some of that cussing is just outrageous. Feel. What does the space feel like, right? What's the room temperature? You might want your weight room to be super hot. You might want it to be super cold, but it's going to create an effect. Are you creating the effect you want intentionally? And like the hardness and softness of it, right? You don't want super cushy chairs in your weight room, right? Because you don't want people sitting down. That's for sure. Unless they got a 405-pound bar on their back and they're squatting with it. It's the only time you can sit, box squats. Smell, taste, okay? Pungency, dump the garbage, right? So what happens in weight rooms all the time is folks have their post-workout shakes, right? Maybe they're even making food and they're putting it in a microwave or something, and then they're throwing it in the garbage and it's just sitting there and it's rotting. So like the next group that comes in, all they do is smell this rotten food that just got dumped in the garbage, right? How is that going to set the tone for that workout, right? So smell and taste is a big deal. So bonds. We just talked about the space. Now, how are we influencing and creating the bonds within that space? Well, finding ways to connect, and we just talked about that in care, right? Eat meals with different people. As a strength and conditioning coach or a sports performance coach, let's say you're at a high school or university, go eat lunch when the kids eat lunch and sit with them. Listen to them talk. Are you sitting with your strength staff always only? I mean, there's a time for that, but encourage your staff to go sit with the kids, right? You can pick up so much information. It's a great time to connect. Team games and competitions. Do you have these incorporated into your programs? I mean, there's a lot of ways to build trust and teamwork by setting up the weight room with different like subgroups and teams that can compete against each other. Like they can compete during the day, over the course of a week, a month, a cycle, whatever. It's up to you. Figure it out. We're thinking about creating bonds while we do it, right? Employee education and development. So one thing we recommend here is if you're serious about being a sports performance coach, you should try to get certified by the National Strength and Conditioning Association. That organization has a credible cert in strength and conditioning that'll allow you to get jobs. Go to the convention together. Let's all go, let's hang out, let's learn together and break some bread. If you're gonna have get-togethers, engage family, right? Bring your family in and try to meet the families of all of your assistants, maybe of the sport coaches. Really know what motivates everybody at home. And since we're talking about sports performance, like fitness together is easy. We're always working out. So just by virtue of our job, if we're training, we're creating bonds, right? Invite everyone to social opportunities. So that's important. If you have a big sports performance department, make sure that you're not just hanging out with one or two of your associates. Make sure you invite everybody always, because we just don't want to have cliques. Cliques are the worst thing on the planet. Career Builder said that 43% of a 3,000 worker survey that their office is populated by cliques. They exist, they just do. And they're pretty prevalent. And this one book I love, Working With You Is Killing Me. I think it's a hysterical title by Catherine Corrali. She said, cliques are most common in organizations with weak leadership. We're sports performance coaches. We can't be weak leaders. We have to be the expert models in leadership. So we should always be on the lookout of not having cliques on our staff and making sure that we're not creating cliques within the teams that are in our weight rooms, right? That's the best part about setting up sub teams and groups. You can mix and match people to make sure that cliques aren't forming, right? And think about this, 13% of those workers said participating in a clique was detrimental to their advancement. Why do you think that is? Why would a clique be detrimental to their advancement? Well, one person in the clique gets fired, everyone else is associated with that person, and you're going to get overlooked. Cliques create groupthink, closed-mindedness, prejudice, security, false belonging, and good old boys club. Of those things, how many do you want in your sports performance program? Do you want groupthink, closed-mindedness, prejudice, security, false belonging? No, 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 no. Clearly, if you said yes to any of those, we got a lot of work to do. So thank you for tuning in to this first part of the homework. There have been questions throughout this entire seminar, and make sure that you answer them fully and completely. And we look forward to looking at your results.